Today, we're jumping straight into a genuinely classic and honestly pretty wild adventure from the pen of Gavin Maxwell. We're talking about unexpected companionship, chaotic international travel, and just a whole lot of splashed water. But before we get into the absolute heart of this journey, let's ground ourselves with one really crucial question. Ask yourself right now, are you truly ready for the lifelong commitment of owning a pet? I mean, it's a serious question. The source material actually kicks off with an activity challenging us to think about the heavy, everyday responsibilities of bringing an animal into our home. It's not all just cute cuddles and playtime. It involves serious time, money, and an enormous amount of patience. Just think about the standard, everyday commitments for a second. If you have a dog or a cat, we're talking annual licenses, vaccinations, toilet training, regular grooming, obedience training, and of course, your daily dose of exercise and affection. These are the basics, right? Well, keep this perfectly normal list of chores in the back of your mind, because it sets up the ultimate contrast for the absolutely wild decision our author, Gavin Maxwell, is about to make. Okay, to really grasp how crazy this story gets, we have to look at two totally opposite worlds. On one hand, we've got Iraq, specifically the Tigris marshes. Think broad plains, heavily flooded areas, and blisteringly hot, dry summers. On the exact opposite end, we have London, a massive, bustling metropolis full of multi-storied buildings, a temperate climate, and that famous year-round rain. As you'll see, taking a creature that is perfectly biologically adapted for the flooded marshes of Iraq and dropping it onto the paved streets of London is going to be, well, quite the adjustment. So let's set the scene. It's early 1956. Our author, Gavin Maxwell, is traveling through southern Iraq. He's grieving the recent loss of his beloved dog Johnny, and honestly, the thought of replacing him with another dog is just too painful. So, what's his logical next step? He casually decides that instead of a dog, he wants an otter. Yeah, an otter. It's an incredibly unconventional choice to say the least, but he kind of figures the watery environment around his home back in Scotland would be the perfect place to try out this little experiment. And how does this life-changing arrival actually happen? Picture this. Maxwell walks into his bedroom at the Consulate General in Basra, and there are two Arabs squatting on the floor. Right beside them is this sack, and it's just squirming from time to time. They hand him a note from a friend, and it simply says, "Here is your otter." The moment he opens that squirming sack, Maxwell's lifelong thraldom, literally his complete absolute captivity and fascination with otters, officially begins. Now, what came out of that sack wasn't exactly cute at first. Maxwell describes it as looking like some small, medievally conceived dragon. It was literally coated head to toe in these symmetrical, pointed scales of mud armor. It took a full month just to clean him up and reveal this incredibly soft, velvet, chocolate brown fur. But here is the craziest part. Mijbil wasn't just any regular otter. He was actually an entirely new subspecies to science. Zoologists eventually named this unique race Lutragal perspiculata maxwelli, or, much easier to say, Maxwell's otter. As you can probably guess, bringing a wild otter indoors comes with some serious quirks. The very first time Maxwell introduced Mijbil to a bathroom, the little guy went absolutely ballistic with joy. He plunged into the bathroom, rolling around, shooting up and down underwater. Maxwell very quickly learned rule number one of otter psychology. Every drop of water must be, so to speak, extended and spread about the place. If there's a bowl of water, it has to be overturned or sat in and splashed everywhere. To an otter, static water is wasted water. And this water obsession, it escalated fast. Within literally 2 days, Mijbil had figured out the plumbing. Maxwell walks into the bathroom to find the otter up on the edge of the bathtub, just fumbling at the chromium taps with his little paws. And amazingly, in less than a minute, Mijbil manages to turn the tap far enough to get a full flow of water going. Though, if he accidentally turned it the wrong way and tightened it instead, he would just chitter with this hilarious, incredible irritation at the tap for failing to cooperate. When he wasn't actively trying to flood the apartment, Mijbil was incredibly inventive at entertaining himself. He would spend hours shuffling a rubber ball around the room using all 4 of his feet, looking exactly like this tiny, 4-footed soccer player. He could even throw the ball super high with just a powerful flick of his neck. But his absolute favorite thing to do? He would lie completely flat on his back and smoothly juggle these small marbles up and down his wide belly, never dropping a single one. But, the fun and games in Iraq had a strict expiration date. It was time to head back to Europe, and Maxwell was facing the absolute dreaded prospect of transporting Mijbil all the way to England. To make matters so much worse, the British airline flat out refused to fly animals, no exceptions. So Maxwell had to scramble, book a flight to Paris on a completely different airline, and figure out how to make his way to London from there. Right, so the timeline of their actual departure is just pure escalating nightmare fuel. The airline insisted that Mijbil be packed into this specific 18-inch square box. So about an hour before the flight, Maxwell puts him in there just to get him used to it and runs out to grab a quick bite. He comes back with literally 10 minutes to spare before they have to leave, and the room is terrifyingly silent. He opens the box, and Mijbil had torn the metal lining to absolute shreds. He's injured, blood-spattered, and whimpering. Maxwell frantically rips out the sharp metal edges, shoves a completely miserable Mijbil back inside, and speed races through the streets of Basra like a ricocheting bullet, just trying to make this flight. Miraculously, they'd actually make it onto the plane. But if you thought they could finally relax, no way. Mijbil was out of that box in a flash. He literally disappeared down the aisle of the aircraft at top speed. Just imagine you're sitting on a 1950s passenger flight, minding your own business, and suddenly this wet, wild, exotic marsh creature is just zooming around your ankles. It was absolute, unadulterated pandemonium. People were squawking and shrieking. One woman actually jumped right up onto her seat, screaming at the top of her lungs, "A rat! A rat!" Maxwell catches a glimpse of Mijbil's tail disappearing under an Indian passenger's legs, dives for it, misses entirely, and ends up face first in a plate of curry. Okay, the real hero of this entire disastrous flight was the air hostess. Maxwell calls her the very queen of her kind, and honestly, it's so easy to see why. Right in the middle of all the screaming and the flying curry, she somehow keeps this charming smile, calmly tells Maxwell to just go back to his seat, and promises that she will find the animal and bring it back to him. And incredibly, she actually pulls it off. A few moments later, Mijbil scrambles right up onto Maxwell's knee and just starts nuzzling his face like nothing happened. So after surviving that absolute nightmare of a journey, they finally made it. The scene shifts completely as Maxwell and Mijbil start settling into life in a central London flat. Mijbil treated the vast, endless marshes of Iraq for a strictly indoor life, filled with ping-pong balls, rubber fruits, and this terrapin shell that Maxwell had hauled all the way from the marshes just for him. You really see his intelligence shine in how he adapted to this new, cramped environment. He invented this brilliantly clever game. So Maxwell had a suitcase that got damaged during the trip, leaving the lid sitting at a weird downward angle. Mijbil figured out that if he placed a ping pong ball on the high end, it would roll down. He would drop the ball, instantly dash around to the other end, hide, and ambush the ball the second it arrived. He'd grab it, trot right back to the top, and do it all over again. He'd literally entertain himself for half an hour at a time doing just this. Now, taking an otter for a walk on a leash in London is obviously an event all on its own. But what's really fascinating is that Mijbil developed these incredibly specific, compulsive rituals, almost like a little kid walking to school. Step 1, he absolutely had to place his feet squarely on the dead center of each paving block. Step 2, he had to touch every 7th upright of the iron street railings. And step 3, on the way home, he would always tug Maxwell toward this primary school wall, jump onto it, and gallop the entire 30-yard length, completely distracting every single student and teacher inside. And of course, your average Londoner in the 1950s had absolutely no idea what on earth they were looking at. Otters belong to a relatively small group of animals called mustelines, and they definitely aren't a common sight in the city. So Maxwell faced this nonstop barrage of hilarious guesses. People thought Midge was a baby seal, a squirrel, a walrus. I mean, one person at a dog show confidently called him a hippo. Others guessed beaver, bear cub, leopard, and one person even jokingly suggested he was a brontosaur. But the absolute best reaction, the one that perfectly captures the sheer bewilderment this poor otter caused, came from a laborer digging a hole in the street. As Maxwell and Mijbil walked by, the man literally laid down his tools, put his hands on his hips, and just stared. He had this look of pure surprise and almost affront on his face. He spat, glared, and then growled out, "Here, mister, what is that supposed to be?" Which brings us right back to where we started, from the flooded marshes of Iraq to the discovery of a brand new subspecies, to absolute chaos at 10,000 feet, and finally to ambushing ping pong balls in a London flat. It's an incredible, chaotic, and deeply touching story. But I've got to leave you with this final thought. After hearing about Mijbil tearing through metal boxes, flooding bathrooms, and causing airplane stampedes, Do you still think you have what it takes to handle an exotic pet? It is a fascinating world out there, but as Gavin Maxwell learned the hard way, it is a massive, lifelong, and totally unpredictable commitment.